I'd like to bring up on stage a man who is now heading up the world's largest car-sharing company. It's Zipcars. It's the people who sponsor the cars outside the theater and help take our speakers around. We've chosen them quite carefully. They've chosen us. Come on up here, Scott.
A little bit about Zipcar. Let me tell you how it works. It's a membership-based system. You join up, you pay an annual fee, typically $50 to $60, so it's not a lot of money to join up, and then you just pay by the hour or by the day. And once you join up, you get a little card, and that's your access point to get in and out of the cars. You make reservations on a website or a touch-tone phone system. The idea is this is all self-service. We're trying not to, as much as we love our members, we're trying not to talk to them very often because we really want to use a virtual business model, automation, to really power the business. The next piece is you go to the car. Once you make your reservation, you unlock it with the card. That's at an unstaffed location. None of our locations have staffing or paperwork, so it's an entirely self-service business model. It's open 24 hours a day. It's open 7 days a week. So the reality is there are times when we need cars. Even those of us that live in cities, work in cities, and may choose not to own a car, there are times we need a car for a business meeting, to run errands, to take the kids to the ballpark. Whatever the reason is, there are times that are there, and we're trying to use this self-service model to allow people to have access 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Then lastly, once you drive the car, you bring it back to its location, you lock it back down with the zip card, and you walk away, and we charge you by the hour again or by the day, starting at about $9 an hour. Or about $60, $65 a day. That includes gas, it includes insurance. So we're trying to really take car ownership, the concept of car ownership, and turn it into a service. We're not trying to automate car rental. We're not trying to do a better job than Hertz or Avis. We don't even really think about that industry, quite frankly. We think our competition is car ownership in most cases. And the convenience that a lot of people see, even though they may not need to own a car in a city because they don't need it very often, they do it because it's convenient. They may use the car one time or 2 times a month, but it sits there at the cost of $800 or $900 by the time you pay for your insurance, your parking space, the car payment, etc. A lot of money racked up for that convenience. And so we're trying to replace that idea with a service that comes 1 hour at a time, but feels a heck of a lot like car ownership. It's estimated today about 40% of the world's population lives in a city. By the year 2030, about 61% of the world's population will live in a city. Why? Well, we're seeing urbanization of the developing economies. If you look at the number of individuals that live in cities in developing economies from Africa, especially to China now, that number is going up exponentially these days. It happens everywhere. It happened in Canada, it happened in the United States. During the turn of the century, we went from agricultural to industrial economies. Everybody moved into a city. We're just seeing the same trends later on in these developing economies. We're also seeing, though, the aging population in developed economies moving back into cities. Because they like city life. It's fun, it's easier, it's simple. You can live there and enjoy the community around you in your neighborhood. And so that's a trend that's happening. And one thing that we're seeing in the US and here in Canada in our operations and over in London where we're operating is more and more young people enjoying city life and deciding not to make that transition out to the suburbs, but to start their family and stay in the city. That's a phenomenon we're seeing more and more of. And so we're trying to fit into those trends and find some way to solve the car problem. Because what happens is we know that in the U.S. alone, we waste about 3 billion gallons of gasoline every year by cars just sitting in traffic. We know that about 50% of the people that live in cities own cars, and of that 50% that own cars, only about 10 or 15% of them actually need a car every day. So this is an extravagant, convenient waste of energy and resources and assets that we're trying to find some solution to. So we went out recently and talked to our membership base and asked them through a survey, what's the least attractive part of urban life for you? And we got 2 interesting responses. One wasn't too surprising. It was the high cost of living. As people find that they stay in the city or move on. We hear about this one all the time. But interestingly, the second one was traffic and congestion. I think this really relates to what people are seeing in many cities. And it was interesting. These were the top 2 in every city that we operate in where we asked our membership base. We have about 100,000 members using Zipcar now. And the answers were consistent. It didn't matter if you were in Toronto, Boston, London, San Francisco. We got the same sort of reaction from everyone. So People love living in the city, but they have this hassle factor of traffic and congestion, and they don't know how to get around it. And so we're a company that's trying to help resolve that issue. What happens when people start to use car sharing, Zipcar, another one of the providers, doesn't matter. What happens is interesting. They start to think differently about car ownership, and they start to trust and depend on car sharing instead of owning a car. And so we know through surveys about 40% of our membership base typically either sells a car or chooses not to buy a car once they start to use our service. So at our current estimate, we see about 20 personally owned cars literally go away for every Zipcar that we put on. So what happens is hopefully over time, these cars are going to start to be driven less, number one, and two, they're going to take up less parking space and add green space in areas where we operate. And 5 or 10 years ago, people would have said I was crazy if I thought there were going to be a lot of people doing this, because it sort of looked more like a social experiment to most people than anything. But today, at 100,000 users, and our estimates take us much, much higher than that, into the millions now, just in North America alone, we're really getting some traction. And so what's happening is there's these 20 cars off the road phenomenon, but we're also seeing another one that we didn't really think about in the beginning, and that is that when people decide not to own a car or to sell the car that they owned, and they just spend enough money to use a car when they need it, we actually save them a lot of money. And again, through a survey, we know that that's about $5,000 a year per customer. If they had owned a car, and that's after they spend on Zipcar, we're saving them $5,000 a year. We think that there's clearly opportunity for us to have about 2 million people in about 15 major metropolitan areas in North America, a like number over in Europe, and a much larger number than either of those continents as we look into Asia over time. So the impact there is you get more green space because these cars go away. 20 cars go away for every car we put on. More money gets spent in the local economy. And another survey result that we hoped for and we anticipated, we didn't really know what would happen at the beginning, is people are actually walking and biking and taking public transit a lot more. Why? Is because, like any other thing that you stop buying one at a time, if you have to start buying something one at a time, you start to look at your spending very differently than if you spent on it once. If you buy a car once and it sits in your driveway, you think about using that car a lot differently than if you had to buy it every time. That concept is driving different driving behavior, and so people are thinking differently about modes of transportation. Now that I don't own a car, should I take a Zipcar? Should I take public transit? Should I walk? Should I get a bike and bicycle sometimes? We're seeing these behaviors all shift, and double-digit percentages increases in all of the other modes start to happen whenever people car share. The other thing that they do is they drive less in total. They start to group their trips, again, because they're trying to save money. This is all about economics. And so they look at this, and when they first join up, often what happens, they'll go off and they'll take a 2-hour trip to run an errand, and then they'll take another 1-hour trip the next day to go to the market and pick up some food. A couple of months into this, they'll start to look at their bill, and they'll say, why didn't I just take one 2-hour trip and lump it all together and save myself some money? Well, when that happens and they group their trips together, they start to use the cars much more efficiently because they're trying to spend less money. So we're not in it to try to drive more behavior of driving. We're actually fine with that. And our pricing actually sets up so that they should do that and make smart decisions about grouping their trips together. So it's a win-win for all of us. We think the market's large enough that we're not going to try to drive people to use cars more. We actually think if they can find a more efficient way to live their life using car sharing, they should. So these are fascinating trends that we're starting to see now, and it's actually starting to shift consumer behavior. So I guess the one point I wanted to make about us and about car sharing is that even though, yep, we're a for-profit business and we're making great headway with the business now in many cities, the impact of the public good that's being created without having spent or taken $1 from a government, without having to change any tax codes, without having to do much of anything on policy, all funded by the private sector, we are now having a very major impact. What a great feeling that is, to be able to be in a business that's actually creating shareholder value, but it's also creating improved sustainable lifestyles and improving the environment as we're at it. Because people are driving our cars, which are much more fuel efficient, they're driving less in total, and so it's a wonderful business to be in. You almost typically have to be in a public sector or government or non-profit type of a company to be in this kind of situation. So it's been a wonderful run for us. over time, what we think is going to happen is car sharing becomes one of 4 or 5 important points for cities to think about when they start to change transportation behavior. London's a pretty interesting case study. As you've probably read in the paper, they put a congestion charge in London. So if you are coming in from outside the city, you have to pay £8 a day now, and they put all these cameras that read your license plate, and it all happens through an automated system, very Zipcar-like. That's a pretty good idea, and so it's gotten a lot of press, and it's actually working. People are definitely driving less, there's no doubt. The one challenge with that is they're now collecting, I think last I heard, about £1.5 million a day in these congestion charges. They're now taking that money that they're getting, that half that's left after they administer it, and they're building more underground work. That's a long lead item. Obviously, building subways takes a long time. There also are many more bus lanes, and they're literally taking out what used to be curbside parking or other curbside reserved areas, and they're just ripping them out and putting buses in. And this is a very, very bold policy that they're doing. And they're ticking people off because they're taking away some of the convenience that used to exist in some of these neighborhoods. That's been a very tough policy decision, but it's the right one to do. And they have money to buy buses. They have money to repave the lanes and shorten those, so it's working. They're also putting on-street parking for car sharing. For us and a couple of other car sharing companies in London, they're literally taking out meters where you used to feed the meter and putting in poles for car sharing only so that our cars can be parked curbside. And that does 2 things. One, it raises awareness, but it also gives people convenience. They know the car is right there in their neighborhood. And then lastly, there's either free or discounted bus for anyone under 18, whether you're a student or whether you're traveling to work. If you're under 18 years old now, you can use the tube for free. Or you can use it for a 50% discount depending on what your status is. But all of these things are being funded by that congestion charge, so really smart policy. The fact that the congestion charge got all the attention in the press, don't let the rest of that go unnoticed, because if you just do the congestion charge, in our view, it's not going to change the rest of it has to come with it. It's not a single point solution any more than car sharing is, frankly. We become part of an overall strategy for a city to really shift. So I've been giving this talk to mayors, to governors, to people that will listen to us, and not really going in and talking so much about car sharing these days, but talking about this and what people ought to do. We think there are probably about 50 major metropolitan areas across the globe where this fits in. They have enough scale. There'll be public transit that will work. It's either in a developing economy or it's already developed, so there's enough economic trends in the city that justify a large-scale car-sharing operation, plus these other policies working. We think overall car-sharing probably worldwide is about an 8 to 10 million user market, up from about 150, 160,000 today. So we are just skimming the surface of this. And why is not because it's green, not because it's sustainable, even though that's a really great outcome. Why is because it just makes sense. But it's my belief that, and it's not a cynical belief, I think it's a practical belief, that most consumers don't make buying choices, services or products around green or sustainability. They just don't. They make those choices around economics. And so that's what we've run our business on, is to make people comfortable that we're going to save them money. So what happens when this trend all starts to come together is we get about 2 to 3 million personally owned cars literally off the roads. A giant, meaningful impact to the consumption of oil, to the amount of wasted energy to build cars, to the amount of wasted energy in landfills where after they're stripped, all the parts have to go. So we start to see some really big benefits across the globe over the next 10 years as this trend continues. So thanks very much.